Hey everyone, welcome back to the Level Up Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Rose, co-founder and CTO at OpsLevel. OpsLevel is an internal developer portal that helps engineering teams quickly ship quality software. Our Level Up Podcast explores challenges, best practices, and stories from some of the brightest engineering and DevOps leaders about what it takes to build great products, teams, and companies. And today we welcome Hazel Weakly to our podcast. Hazel spends her days working on building out teams of humans, as well as the infrastructure, systems, tools, and automation necessary to make their life better. She's worked at a variety of companies and across a gigantic range of tech, and she knows that the hardest problems to solve are not the technical ones, but often the social ones. Hazel also serves currently as the director on the board of the Haskell Foundation, and is fondly known as the infrastructure witch of Hackaderm, which is one of the more popular Mastodon instances. She's also created the official Haskell setup GitHub action and helps maintain it. And as somebody who personally used Haskell in college and really enjoyed it, I'm super, super happy to hear that involvement. So Hazel, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the roles that you've had kind of in and around infrastructure, automation, SRE, security. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. So I'm Hazel, and I work remotely, and I've been in Seattle, and I've been based in here since October. Quite enjoyed the area. It's been one of my favorite cities to ever live in, and it's just been wonderful. In my career, I've actually done not quite everything, but kind of sort of everything. So I started off in web development and somehow found myself building all the Docker containers, and somehow found myself doing all of the operations work, the infrastructure stuff, and kind of fixing things where they needed to be fixed. And then I moved over into another web development job and did the same thing. And after 2 or 3 jobs of going, I'm accidentally doing all the infrastructure, I decided to do it on purpose. And was that a mistake? Who knows? But since then, I've mostly been focused in the site reliability engineering, systems resilience, developer platforms, productivity, things like that. One of the things that I enjoy most about what I do is that I absolutely love being able to make other people's lives better, and doing that through giving them a tool or giving them just what they need in order to be more productive and be happier and healthier is something that I find extraordinarily rewarding. And that's kind of guided my entire career.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like also the was it a good idea? Was it not a good idea? But it's sort of like the switch that I find a lot of kind of product developer. I find a very natural way that people kind of gravitate towards this cross-cutting. I'll call it platform engineering. Right? Is they start as a product developer and just naturally gravitate more towards the kind of operational side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, platform engineering is one of those interesting things where if you look at the entire tech industry, we over and over again encounter a different way to look at the same problem and a different way to address and think of the same solution. And the context of it is different, and so the approach is always slightly different. But the fundamental idea is very much the same. So for platform engineering, you can actually sort of trace back the concepts that it's trying to solve all the way back to the Agile Manifesto, which is doing the same thing, where you have people and they say, it turns out developers want to do good things. They want to make an impact, they want to help people, and they want to be able to do what they want to be, what they need to do for the company. And if you remove a lot of barriers that are in place for no real reason, and you enable developers by asking what they need and then just kind of giving them that, it turns out that works really, really well. And so the Agile Manifesto said, what if we just didn't have 8 months of planning and 4 months of development, and we kind of blended the two? And then you had the DevOps movement, which was the same thing of, what if you didn't have 8 months of coding and then 8 months of releasing it? What if you just kind of blended the two so that people could think about the whole problem and actually understand the solution? And then you have platform engineering coming in even later, and what is that solving? It's the same thing. It's the same thing in a new reincarnation, in a new skin. What happens when you take developers and you give them something that they can use that makes them more productive? And before we had a new language makes you more productive, or maybe a new tool that makes you more productive, or a new process that makes you more productive. And the next thing that makes you more productive is a combination of all that and really the shared context and the shared understanding of the problem that you're working on is what people need. And they've always needed that. And trying to solve that shared understanding, shared context problem is what everything leading up to this has done, and it's what platform engineering enables for itself in the new incarnation.
Yeah, I like a lot of the tone there because, something I was thinking about, and I, read a blog post of yours, right, that talked about, let me get the exact title right. So you want to hire for developer tooling. And it talked about, when you're trying to hire somebody that's going to focus on platform engineering or developer experience, they're trying to push that forward holistically. I'm going to quote you, right? Like, you want to be able to gain the trust and buy-in for the approach. You want to deliver perceived value and improvements. And I definitely see a ton of alignment with what is written in the Agile Manifesto. I'd actually go further. I think if I squint at that and look at it the right way, it almost sounds like product management, right? Like, doing discovery with users who happen to be developers, being able to understand their problems, being able to champion those problems, being able to iterate on solutions for them, not with some 8-month big bang thing, but through this idea of incremental improvement. So what are your thoughts on that? On kind of like this overlap between platform engineering and the words like platform as a product?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there is a ton of overlap, and I think it's actually very, very intentional. And if you lean into that overlap and that understanding, you can unlock a lot of benefits. So like one of the things that you've seen from an executive vision in the last several years is more of a focus on like a matrix style organization, and also simultaneously more of a focus and understanding of product-led growth as a really powerful strategy for finding your audience and connecting with them and giving them something that is really actually useful for them and what they need, so that they're not being locked into you, but they're willingly really wanting what you can give them, and you're able to give them what they want, and perhaps there's some lock-in there. But really the lock-in switches from being a way to trap them to being a way to continue to give them what they want in a more efficient manner. And so it becomes a lot healthier and becomes a lot more effective. And that way of thinking of, is it a service like company or is it a product-led company? Like, is that product-led growth strategy effective? If you take that product-led growth strategy and you focus it internally into the company and you specialize it towards like the technology, like the IT side of things, it turns into that platform, that internal platform where you yourself are your own product. And that product-led growth of your internal platform, of your platform team, is very, very necessary, to the point where I would say one of the most effective hires you can make for an internal platform team is indeed a product manager. You want one of those. You really do. And you should treat your own engineers as your own product. And it turns out that like all of those tools that we have as a company for thinking financially about like customers, about personas, about all these other things, they apply one-to-one to your own employees. They apply one-to-one to your own hiring counts, to your own everything. And what better way to test your ability to be a product-led growth company than can you do that to yourself?
That's really interesting. So yeah, I guess businesses have all this rigor that they apply to developing their own products and go-to-market motions around product-led growth that it'd be foolish not to apply that same kind of set of standards to just a different audience, which is their internal developers.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. In fact,
let
me give you an example.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So there is, if you want to think about a technological migration, so I'm going to describe a technological migration, and you can probably tell me what product-led growth process this feels like. So the way to do a technological migration is you can break it down into 3 steps. The first step is de-risking it. You want to work with a key team that really needs this and sort of go through the step with them and figure out if it really meets their needs, iterate on it, tweak it, get it ready to go. The second step is the enablement process, where you automate the vast majority of doing this migration. You make it easy, you write out the documentation, you enable it. And then you execute that enablement. And the third step is the cleanup. It's the last mile in which you fully convert everything over, and you have that timeline, that progress, the burn down, and you do that. And when you have finally converted everything over, then you can switch off the old system. So as I was talking about that as a concept of technological migrations, what product-led strategy did that sound like?
I mean, it sounds a lot like when I think of product led, I think of starting with early adopters or some set of users, growing to kind of through some kind of a network effect and gathering a team or getting other invites and kind of growing that way, and then eventually land and expand or grabbing an entire organization. And so as I think about those three steps, it sounds very similar. The de-risk is like work with one set of users who like have the core problem. Enablement sounds like, okay, great, you've solved it for that one set. How do you get other people involved and get other stakeholders? And then the execution cleanup is like, okay, now we're going to just cover the entire organization.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the more exciting but not obvious implications of platform engineering is the opportunity to take this sort of semantic knowledge of technology and make it more applicable across a wider variety of domains. One of the really difficult and challenging tasks of platform engineering is even getting it started. Like, how do you convince a team of executives that they should spend maybe 10 or 20% of their engineering headcount or 10 or 20% of their like CTO org budget on themselves? Like, where's that return on investment? Where's that multiplier? If you took that and stuck it in the bank, can you just hire your way out of any problems you have? Why do you want to invest into that thing with no like real gains on it? But if you think about things in terms of that product like growth, or in terms of that like fiscal maturity that we have around understanding growing your own like platform, growing your own market segment, and things like that, it can make a lot more sense. You have more tools at your disposal to get people to understand the potential value here, and more importantly, to know if they're executing on achieving that value from their teams better.
It's an interesting thing that I was thinking about that you brought up, I think, in your article was kind of the different inflection points that organizations go through as they're growing, right? From like, I think it was 5, 15, 50, like the kind of Dunbar numbers of growth. What are some of those hinge points when it starts to make sense for organizations to start taking more and more investment or placing more and more investment into platform engineering, or kind of these cross-cutting organizational concerns?
So there's platform engineering, and then there's like infrastructure. And platform engineering is a particular manifestation of what it looks like to grow your infrastructure over time. So if you think of your development of a product, like software development, you have like your ability to write the code. You have your ability to verify that the code like solves the actual problem that you needed to, and then you have your ability to operate that code once it's actually like in the real world. And those sort of three chunks of the lifetime are what you need to develop in a balanced manner as you get there. And so because platform engineering and because infrastructure can be such a high leverage activity, you don't need to have like a third of your headcount in each in each area. Same for like testing or verification. You can build a lot of automation around that, so you don't necessarily need a third here, a third there, and a third there. But you need to invest in ratio. And so for platform engineering, for infrastructure, for that area in general, if you have about, say, 5 engineers or so, that's about the amount of engineers everyone can just like sit there in a Zoom chat. They can chill, they can program. That's the quintessential in my garage startup mode. Do you need infrastructure? Do you need a lot of other things? Maybe not. But to take a step back, where do these 5, 15, 50, etc. numbers come from? For me, they come from like taking Dunbar's social numbers of like the size of a social group and sort of applying that to this. And really where this motivation is coming from is, what does it mean to take a shared conceptual idea of the problem, the shared conceptual idea of your understanding of your code base, your collective groupthink essentially of the market, like that whole execution, everything in there of your collective group memory. And what does it mean to share information there, and how does that necessarily change as you grow in size? Like if you have 5 people, everyone can know everything. You don't even need to have like maybe documentation. You don't even necessarily need to have product or strategy or whatever. You just talk to the other 4 people and you come to an agreement and everyone knows everything.
Right. It's kind of too small to even have siloing occur. There's only one silo. Yeah.
At 15, that's different. You no longer can really have one manager. Or if you do, they're extremely fucking stressed. You know, so like at 15, you have probably close to 2, and you're thinking about 3 teams. And so at that point, now you have the ability to have silos. So you probably need infrastructure at some point. Maybe you don't need an infrastructure person, but you need expertise enough in infrastructure to have something. And the reason for that is because you have multiple teams, because you have like multiple silos of information and you can't fully synchronize everything, the context of how to deploy something, the context of how it operates, the context of you being able to, as an engineer, get that feedback loop of, I wrote this code, what did it do in production, what did it do to the whole system, what did it do for the customer? You don't have that whole feedback loop unless you intentionally start to build it. Yep. And that's where that infrastructure component comes in. So you need some infrastructure. But by the time you have 50 engineers is that threshold, which a lot of companies really have a misstep because they're in the middle of hypergrowth. So like if you've seen the hypergrowth trajectory for a lot of startups, they go from 15 to like 75 or 80 engineers in 1 year.
Right.
Really, really common path. So you skip 50. But 50 is the inflection point. And a lot of people miss that. So the inflection point there is that's really when it makes sense to have a very, very dedicated person for developer tooling. At least one person, and their entire job is to make everybody else more efficient. So at that point, you should already have infrastructure. You probably already have infrastructure people. Maybe you have a small team of like SREs. The first person that you hire for developer tooling will grow to become the person that helps build the internal platform. You don't have an internal platform yet. But if you don't have that key hire by 50, you're too late and you're going to need to play catch up.
Yep.
Which is fine, but you should intentionally choose to play catch up. You shouldn't find yourself at 150 engineers going, oh crap.
Yeah, there's no leverage that we're getting. One thing I think about 50 as a crossing point is that if you think about 50 product developers and then you hired your first kind of developer tooling person, that's 2% of your kind of engineering budget. And so the hope is that, you know, that person can have more impact than 2%. They can improve things more than 2%, in which case you'll get positive ROI.
Absolutely. And so it's tricky there because if you think in just that 2%, you're going to underinvest. Like the real percentage of the engineering time should be about 10% to 20% of your entire engineering budget should always be on infrastructure. Even from the beginning, it's just when you have 5 people. What is 20% of the time? That's like 1 or 2 hours a week, right? So you don't need a dedicated person and everyone could just kind of randomly do it. When you have 15 engineers, what's 10% of the time? That's 1.5 people. So 1.5 people need to be doing and thinking about infrastructure. Where's that half coming from? Probably random, you know, sort of as people need because they still have that context. But at least one person is really, really thinking about infrastructure full time. 50 engineers, that's 5 people. 5 to 10 should be thinking about infrastructure full time. And once you get more than 5 to 10 people thinking about infrastructure full time, you need at least 10% of that to be thinking about improving the actual developer process in general, and that's the developer tooling. So that's where that 2% comes from. But it's buried in that 10 to 20% you should already be thinking of in general for infrastructure. And within that 10 to 20%, that, you know, 10 to 20% of that should be developer process, developer tooling, developer efficiency in general.
Got it. And I'd love to dial in more on the kind of theme around developer tooling. You have written a bunch of systems, worked at a bunch of companies, had a bunch of impact, helping make the lives of other engineers better. Well, you know, it's kind of a broad question, but if I say developer experience, like, what does that mean to you? What does good developer experience sort of look like?
So developer experience is, and I do want to call out, I really like the phrasing of developer experience over developer productivity. And the reason for that is because if you focus on developer productivity, you're going to end up with actually over-focusing on the wrong metrics. And the developer experience is the stronger indicator. So, for example, you can have things that are like some of the strongest indicators of developer productivity come from like developer experience, and the area in developer experience that they come from is how happy and satisfied and whole do developers feel working on the system. It's kind of like a garden in a very real sense. Like if your developers enjoy tending the garden, if the garden is beautiful and makes them feel at peace, you have a good quality system. And that can be very uncomfortable for people who like numbers. Like if I explain this to someone who runs a sales team, they're gonna just break out in a nervous sweat, right? They're gonna go, "What's the OTE? What's
Right.
the? What do you mean you can't numbers this?" And I'm like, it's different. It's knowledge work, and the knowledge work requires that happiness and that wholesome. And so I do like developer experience as the need there. For me, like I said, it really focuses on, are you achieving the right result? Are you achieving the right outcome? Which is developers continue to feel happier and more fulfilled at their work as they work on things. If you're improving that, you're doing it right. What does that look like for your company? It can vary. But if I look at the research out there, which the DX team, headed by Abi Noda, has done some wonderful work there. And they have a DevX paper that they've come out with, and Kat from Pluralsight has come up with the developer thriving framework, and they complement each other extraordinarily well. So the DevX paper has like 3 components to it. You have the flow of a team. Is that team able to like get heads down, like really do work? That's a strong component, and everything related to that is, are you feeling well? Are you good? Like, do you have interruptions? Do you come to work feeling motivated? Do you come to work feeling energized? Do you get to stay energized? That's flow. Then you have the context overhead, which is, the way I like to think of that is, how much random crap do you have to keep in your head in addition to the problem you're working on in order to not break something or in order to actually get anything done? Like if I write a piece of code, do I have to think of the entire system, or can I just run the test suite? Do I have to make sure I email this one person to let them know that I'm about to do something, or can I just whatever? Like, what does it mean to do something, and what is all the cognitive overhead associated with that? The third component is feedback loops. And so what I really love about the DevX paper is their definition of feedback loops, which is the speed and quality of responses to actions performed. And it's that second half, the quality of the responses, that's actually the most important part of it. And a lot of people forget that. And that's where like focusing on developer productivity can really hurt you, because one of the things you might want to focus on is ticket velocity, or like velocity in general of a team, and that is the wrong thing to measure, because people will start optimizing for that, and they'll start completing buckets of tickets. Are they doing meaningful work? Are they doing like quality work? You're not measuring that. You're measuring speed. Speed and quality is feedback loops. And so when you have tooling for developers, it's that and quality that actually really makes the whole thing work.
Yeah, it's
And
almost
so,
the check and the balance between speed, which is, yeah, you have to go fast, but quality to kind of apply some back pressure so that you're pointing that speed in the right direction.
yeah. And so a good program for a company that focuses on truly improving developer experience balances those 3 concepts: your flow, your cognitive load, and your feedback loops across the sort of 3 general levels of the organization, which would be like the executive level, like the senior leadership, the managerial level, and then the IC level. Or perhaps a different way to think about it, like the individual level, the team level, and then the vertical level. So can you balance across all 3 of those levels these 3 components of developer experience?
Nice. So Hazel, I'd love to ask, one thing you also wrote about is that it seems like in a lot of the organizations you've been in, there was a lot of ambiguity in terms of the impact that your role was going to have, right? And one quote I remember was, I built what they needed, but not what they asked for, right? It seems companies didn't even seem to know what they wanted. They just, I just want to hire someone and rub some DevX on it and hope for the best. So what advice would you give to other engineers that find themselves in that kind of a situation where there is a ton of ambiguity or the organization maybe isn't really clear on exactly what they want?
So that one can get really, really tricky. And that is one of the reasons why I say that developer tooling is one of the most prone to burnout areas to hire in. If you work in developer tooling, if you work in platform engineering, what you're doing is you're leading without authority in a socio-technical system with that deep understanding of the social aspects of it. Can you empathize with your developers? Can you work with them? Can you really understand where they're coming from and see what they need? And then can you get that accomplished and get the buy-in required to get that accomplished? And so getting that buy-in is really, really tricky. And sometimes you can't get the buy-in. And so what happens if you don't get that buy-in? There are certain strategies you can do. And so like at this one company in particular, that company was a contracting company, and so they had a lot of different projects, and each project had an individual billing time. The institutional organizational issue here that was preventing them from having good developer experience was that each project couldn't have cross-cutting concerns. Organizationally, they didn't have the institutional ability at the company, at like the executive level, to think about cross-cutting concerns. And that's fine because it's a contracting company. They never really needed that.
Right.
But now they kind of needed it, and they didn't have that. They spent 20 years not needing that.
Right.
And you can't just get that ability in a day.
Was that because it was an agency, and so kind of each customer is a silo? So it's like you do one project, and then you go to the next and the next, and that idea of cross-cutting concern just doesn't seem to apply.
It doesn't apply. In a successful consulting company, or you do end up eventually building that, or you run out of what you can accomplish having that silo over and over. It gets really hard to meet that because in a competitive market, someone else is going to figure out that, and then they're going to start being able to undercut you. And so you do need that ability, but you're not pressured to get it from the market intrinsically. So it can be really hard to know you need that. This company needed it, but they didn't have it. So what I did was I went around to about 10 or 15 different projects that were working simultaneously that I knew had the same problem. They didn't know they had the same problem, but I knew because I had talked to like all 40 or 60 at some point. And so I went to them and I got 10 hours here, 20 hours here, 15 hours here, etc. And I built up a collection of a couple hundred hours of billable time that I massaged together into a contiguous pool. And when I did that, I carved out enough time to build them what they needed. And so for each project, it was, here's this thing, and you need this. And I don't have enough time to do it, but I'm going to work and get you this time, and etc. So I was able to sell it there and grab out of what wasn't sort of an impossible situation, like a month or two of time in which I could build an internal platform for them. And funny story about that platform. It was a Kubernetes cluster for auto-scaling CI runners, along with a couple other things. So I built the entire thing using Kubernetes, Argo CD, GitOps in general, a couple best practices. I used NixOS for the operating system so that everything was declarative and text-based, including the entire provisioning of the VMs and all of that configuration as well. And I deployed it, got it ready, and then finished finalizing it, and then I cut the system live on a Friday afternoon. And then I left for parental leave for 4 months. And they had one 10-minute call with me halfway through when they couldn't figure out something. But otherwise, it worked perfectly. Amazing. And then I didn't intend to do this, but I came back from parental leave and then gave my 2 weeks notice. And so they had the system that I had built. And I actually talked with one of the developers at that company yesterday, just to see how everything was going. And it turns out they still use it. And in fact, they use it in almost every single project of the company now. and it's been working like a champ for them. They've had a few quirks and issues here and there, but by and large, it's been steady as a rock, and it's been a huge value improvement for the entire company.
And it sounds like, why do you think that is?
Because it's what they needed. And so the huge value improvement there came from, for the first time, the company was able to have a cross-cutting concern addressed, which was like, do they have this testing? Do they have this ability to actually like run things? Do they have like caching or object storage or all of these things that you would take for granted in the cloud, but they couldn't use the cloud because of compliance reasons?
That's really interesting. It sounds again, yeah, like the discovery that you did, being able to understand what are the problems that are cross-cutting, and then finding a solution that actually works for them. That's what's making this system have kind of lasting value over time.
Absolutely.
Nice. You've also talked about mistakes engineering organizations make when they're trying to hire people to work on developer tooling. So, what are most organizations kind of doing wrong here?
There are so many possible mistakes here. I would say not investing sufficiently is a really good one. Another one is that if you don't know what a good person to build an internal platform looks like, it's really hard to find one. Because they're going to be someone who leads without authority very well. They're going to be someone who understands socio-technical systems very, very well. And by and large, those types of people will largely not be white men. And it's really, really easy in a startup to source from your local network or to source from people who have a local network, and that will give you a very high over-index of white men as like your founding team. And if you need to start building out a team, people who understand socio-technical systems, like 15 engineers, you probably need to look somewhere that you're not used to looking. And you probably need to like be very intentional about that. But how do you do that and create that type of welcoming environment for people when there's only like 10 people and they're the only not white men there? So that can be tricky. Another thing that can be tricky is the magical give me a rock game, where you have like this need, and it's really easy as an executive to have a need and to want that need to be solved. So you hire someone to solve a need. But the need is not like object. It's not a procedure. It's not mechanical. It's that like social aspect. So the need is you're going to hire someone to do this thing, and they're going to start doing things, and then they're going to appear to not start do things anymore, and then they're going to tell you that the entire organization maybe thinks about something in the wrong way, or maybe they're going to say things that are very uncomfortable for you, like the lack of safety on the team actually prevents them from doing things, or maybe you as the VP of engineering in a startup, people work around you in order to get things done. You actually make the problem worse, and that's very, very, very hard to hear as an executive, particularly if you're doing that executive level role well. But there's a lot of components to that, and just because you're a good executive doesn't mean you're a good leader for a socio-technical system in that developer tooling investment area or in that developer experience area. You'd like to think that there's a good overlap there, but the amount of like business acumen required to like do a certain thing does not have a whole lot of overlap with can you build a social environment that people like that also makes them productive. Those are not overlapping skill sets. It would be great if they were, but they're not.
You're saying then that to optimize for kind of like business success and business prowess doesn't always induce kind of a good social cohesive environment that people are happy to work at, and that's a kind of a different set of skills to be able to focus on.
Right. And especially if you're really concerned about finding that market fit and finding that like product fit and starting to build out like a bunch of things very quickly before you even know you have like solid funding, or before you even know what the next 2 to 4 years looks like, do you want someone to come in and look at things and go, maybe you should spend like 10 or 20% of your budget right now on like these issues that don't actually, they're not customer facing. Are you going to listen to them? Are you going to listen to someone who says, actually, you know what, you should hire someone to be like a manager of these teams, and you should stop talking to the engineers because every time you do, they get kind of depressed. Like, how do you hear that conversation? Because if you're hiring the first developer tooling person, you should be prepared for that type of conversation. Because if they're good and you need someone to do this sort of thing, they're going to start poking at the holes of the socio-technical system.
Something I was thinking about earlier in our conversation was this idea that as organizations scale from 15 to 75 and they blow past 50, that becomes a time you need to invest. And if you do it late, you have to be intentional that you're playing catch up. And I think to this point, it's more by the time you're hiring that first developer tooling person, they will have a lot of questions. It's like, why is this the status quo right now? Like, how did we get here? And it sounds like you need a ton of intellectual honesty in a leader to be able to manage those types of questions, because otherwise it'll be, it can be challenging and seen maybe as an attack on their ego or an attack on like how they've been running the org to that point.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it can be really tricky because you don't want that attack on the ego. Even if, no matter how valid it may or may not be, it's still oftentimes not necessarily productive. But at the same time, there are difficult questions that often need answers, and they may not have anything to do with the platform itself that you're trying to build, but at the same time, they will. And it's about like that implications. It's as if, like in a product-led growth strategy, if someone tries to do that and they have like a go-to-market and they have a funnel and they've built out all that stuff, and then they release a product and people like it, and then they make some changes and people seem to like it, and they make some more changes, and a year later, all of a sudden between like, Q1 and Q2, usage drops by 90%. 90. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, what the fuck happened? What happened? And then they bring in a consultant in, and the consultant says, well, what did you do? Did you change things? And they said, well, yeah, but nobody complained. And then when did you change things? Oh, here, then here, and then here, and then here, and then here. And then nobody complained, and then everyone complained. And so they have to bring up this idea of like the thermoculine, like the boiling point of trust. Of like, did you build up this like product that was cool and then slowly erode any trust that people had in it until everyone at the same time decided they had enough? Mm-hmm. And you can do that in a product-led growth company very easily. But you can do that with your own developers too. And so if someone comes in and they go, it seems like you're at sort of a boiling point in terms of how developers trust you and how they trust the system and how they're able to work in that system and build it and develop it and iterate it. And you're not going to notice that you're at that boiling point at the edge of the cliff because you can't see it. Everything's been fine. And so if someone comes in and says, you have impending doom, do you believe them? Do you not?
Right.
And that can be the hardest part of being the first hire there.
The boiling metaphor, I think, is apt because I'm reminded of like kind of the boiling frog. And when you're the VP, you are the frog, and you're like, oh, the water's warm, but it feels nice, right? And then, but you're 10 minutes away from being dead. Yeah. That's a really good observation.
Yeah. Plus, if you're like a CPO, what does that mean for you as like a person? You built a strategy. You spent a year developing it. You spent 2 years developing it. Everything's going great. Numbers go up, and then usage drops by 90% in a quarter. Like, what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for everything that you learned as being a CPO in the last 2 years? Like, does that... Now, that can be demoralizing. That can be, like, really ruinous to your ability to think as a CPO. And for a CTO, I think the evolution of platform engineering and, like, the prevalence of it, and, like, as it's growing to be more of a thing, is going to start to cause that type of conversation to happen at the technology area. Where like VPs of engineering or CTOs are going to go, okay, our productivity went down this quarter to this quarter by like 90%. Or all of a sudden the amount of failures we had in production went up by like 2 orders of magnitude. Or all of a sudden everything just really, really broke apart. And what does that mean when everything was going right? In theory.
Yeah. Yeah, you're kind of describing the sort of cataclysmic failure that can occur just as a result of this slow boiling, and then a bunch of things just topple all at once because of that lack of investment in keeping the lights on and keeping developers happy and investing in that platform engineering, developer tooling, developer happiness kind of arena.
Right, exactly. And investing in developer happiness can be such a tricky subject because, for one thing, people don't want to associate that with productivity, and they don't want to associate that with delivering value to the customer because it's not tangible and it's not measurable. But it's also not fixable in the same way. Like
Right.
if developer compensation is tied to developer happiness, that's fine. You just budget that out. That's like a CapEx number. You get the forecast going. You have that future discount value, and you're good to go. But developers aren't happy because things need to be fixed, and no one can tell you what needs to be fixed. How do you solve that?
Yeah.
Particularly as a platform product.
And I think again, then it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about this idea of like you need to apply almost the rigor of product management and having a ton of empathy for other developers and understanding what the problems are and listening to common themes, getting buy-in, and then trying to drive those solutions across the board. And sometimes that buy-in can be difficult because you're kind of rubbing up against a leader that has set up the system in this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I will have one more question, Hazel, I'd love to ask you, which is a common thing I hear from platform engineering teams is this tension between offering direct support, right? Like there's a Slack channel or some mechanism and product engineers like, hey, platform team, we need help with X. Like this is broken. Can you help us out? And investing in longer term goals. And so what's your experience been in terms of being able to manage that tension? Like how should platform teams think about that investment between kind of like these short-term immediate, pain points and wins or support versus longer term goals when they're prioritizing?
Oh, goodness. So this is something that I'm actually currently struggling with right now. So my team is the infrastructure and developer experience team. And as part of the infrastructure and developer experience organization, we currently have about, 6 to 800% overwork in that there's that much more work than we have headcount for the team. So we have that sort of on-call experience. We have that help desk experience of the user asks. And we have what we would like to do for the platform, what we would like to do for all of that developer experience aspect. And we essentially are right now treading water. And so this is a very, very relevant question. When it comes to how to address this, there's two components that I see. The first one is, how do the other teams in the organization view you? So when I came in, the other teams had started to build up this sort of organizational immune response around the team. The team had been unresponsive for so long that they had started just trying to solve their problems themselves. And so I actually essentially stopped work temporarily on the platform or on key initiative evolutionary upgrades and focused entirely on that help desk aspect for about a quarter, just to get other teams to trust us again, to the point where I could see the whole scope of the problem. So now that I know the whole scope of the problem, how do you preserve that trust from other teams and you while digging yourself out of the hole? And there's two ways you can dig yourself out of the hole. One is you can hire your way out of it, and one is you can make the problem not yours, and you can sort of essentially ignore it and focus on what you need to do. So that's very much if you have 2 rooms in the house burning, which one do you save first? And really, sometimes the answer is you get the people out first, even if it means burning the entire house down, and you don't try and save the fire. So, what that means for us specifically is I'm going to place the resourcing of the team to kind of where it needs to be and ratchet it down to there and hire our way out of where we need to go. And at the same time, the trust is going to be reserved from the communication aspect of here's where we're at. If things need to be addressed, here's the